Hi. There was a fair amount of attention last week to the experience of my friend Josh Leifer, whose launch event for his excellent new book, Tablets Shattered, was closed because the bookstore wouldn't permit him to be speaking alongside a moderator who was a quote unquote Zionist rabbi. And it produced a lot of commentary. And I do think this is something which is growing as a tendency, this tendency to say that if you are a Zionist, then you are kind of excluded from conversations. There was even a thing that happened in the UK where there was a march which said that Zionists had to leave a certain neighborhood in London. I want to explain why I think this is self-defeating and unwise. The first reason is that Palestinians and Jews who support Palestinian freedom have been excluded from conversations for a very, very long time and still are, sometimes even by force of law. And the argument against that is that these are restrictions on free speech and that people should have the right to be heard and to make their case. So this is what many of us have argued about the rights of Jews who don't support a Jewish state to speak at Hillel, for instance, or the rights of Palestinians to express their point of view and not be called anti-Semites just because they don't support a Jewish state. And I do think you undermine the clarity of that argument when people on the left turn around and then basically say basically Zionists are not allowed to have a platform in our spaces, right? I think it undermines the effort, the really important effort to say that in other spaces, whether they're establishment Jewish spaces or kind of more mainstream American political spaces, that Palestinians, the vast majority of whom, of course, don't support the idea of a Jewish state, or other people who don't support a Jewish state, should have the right to speak, right? That was something that was tragically didn't happen at the Democratic National Convention, but I think it makes it harder to make that case if you're excluding people on your own turf. Secondly, I, of course, understand the logic which would say, well, Zionism is the ideology of this state. This state is classified as an apartheid state by a lot of human rights organizations. It's therefore a racist ideology, and we wouldn't have, white supremacists come and speak at our in our bookstores or whatever. But I think there are some important differences and some problems with that logic. The first is that for many Jews, Zionism has an intimate and often somewhat vague meaning, which does not actually line up with supporting the actions of this state, and sometimes doesn't even actually line up with supporting Jewish statehood at all. There is a tradition of cultural Zionism which opposed the Jewish state. And if you, even among people who have never heard of cultural Zionism, what Mira Sukharov's polling has found, which is really fascinating, is that American Jews define themselves as Zionists under certain definitions. But if you tell American Jews that Zionism means a state in which Palestinians are not treated equally to Jews, then they actually say they're not Zionists. So the point is that the discourse within the Jewish community about what Zionism means can often be quite different than I think what it is on the left. And I'm not saying that the Jewish one is right. It's understandable that people on the left would say Zionism is what Israel does. But I think when you close down conversations with Jews for whom Zionism means essentially a kind of an affinity, a connection with that place, with those people, but who haven't actually necessarily grappled that much with the contradictions of the principles toward the principles of equality and liberal democracy. Those are in some ways, I think, the very people that you want to be in conversation with if you're trying to change the American debate, trying to change the American Jewish debate. Because what Mira Sukharov's polling shows is that when you confront people who call themselves Zionists with the reality that Israel is fundamentally unequal under law towards Palestinians, that actually many of them then rethink their perspective and may even rethink the term Zionist and whether it applies to them. So do you really want to not give the opportunity to have those conversations? I think that we are in a moment, I mean, it's been true for quite a long time, but especially now, in which people who are making a critique of the idea of Jewish statehood based on the idea of equality under the law, based on the idea that ethno-nationalism, tribal supremacy is wrong, in Israel-Palestine, just like it's wrong in the United States, like it's wrong in France, like it's wrong in Hungary, like it's wrong in India. Those people have a very, very powerful argument. And the more they can get into those discussions with people who have been raised to believe in the idea of a Jewish state, but have not necessarily thought a lot about what a Jewish state means from, as Edward Said famously said, from the standpoint of its victims. Those conversations, I actually think, can be extremely productive in terms of changing debate inside the American Jewish community and changing debate inside the United States as well. And when you basically say no Zionists are allowed in that conversation, I actually think you're forfeiting a chance to make change. And what you end up doing is basically just making people become very alienated and very angry. And that exclusion doesn't, I think, actually move one towards a shift in the public conversation at all.